Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Well, it's not an adult-to-adult conversation, and I would say welcome to parenthood, because we do talk till we're blue in the face, and the kids really do think that they know better. Well, I mean, I'm astounded at how much our 8-year-old really thinks that she knows compared to us. She knows everything.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson, the founder of happyfamilies.com.au and dad to 6 kids. I'm here with Kylie, my wife and mum to those 6 kids as well. And Kylie, today a conversation that we're going to have courtesy of Craig Bruce, our executive producer. He said, you guys need to talk about the fights that you have to have with your kids. 10 fights that parents have got to have with their kids because it's worth fighting about this stuff. So that's what we're going to do.
I don't really know where to go with this one because I am so over fighting with our kids.
It's exhausting.
I would love to
What do you mean?
think,
What do you mean, Mrs. Happy Families? We don't fight with our children.
I would love to think that we could come up with something better than a fight.
I'm the author of all these books about how to not fight with your kids, but how to have a happy family. What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. Hang on a sec. I just need to go and put my head back in the sand while you do this podcast on your own.
Well, I was about to say, anyone who has a child, they don't even need to have 6, would know that this is a conversation that you're going to have over and over again.
The reality is, if you're in relationship with someone, anyone, if you're in relationship with somebody, you are going to have disputes. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreement. There are all different ways that we can deal with those disagreements and those conflicts, but there will be preferences that one person holds that are not consistent with the preferences that the other person holds. And if that person, the other person in the relationship that's not you,
happens to be 12.
Yeah, I was going to say 12 months, but it doesn't really matter, right? They're going to have a different opinion. They're going to see the world differently, different perspective, different preferences and so on. And conflict is bound to ensue. And when they're younger, they're also fairly clumsy in the way that they express their preferences and the way they try to...
I don't think that is just for the young.
No, of course not. I mean, your mum. Oh, did I just say that? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I just said that. We need to bleep that out. I'm just kidding. Let's move on. So let's talk about these 10 fights that you absolutely have to have. We've made a list, folks. We've made a list, but we're only going to spend about 1 second on each of them because we feel like there's a more important conversation to be had than what the actual content or topics of the fights are. Let's start, and we'll go through them in age order, okay? So from the youngest age, when do the fights start and what are they about, through to middle childhood and then through to adulthood?
As soon as that baby lands in your arms, there's fights about sleeping and eating and...
Yeah, and it gets worse as they get older, right? I mean, the reality is you're probably not going to fight with them when they're little. You just, in a perfect world, you will give them whatever they want. They scream and you bend over backwards to make sure that they're satisfied.
Stop screaming.
Their needs are met. That scream is a really effective way of making sure that people pay attention and give me what I want. But as they get older, the sleep conversation and the food conversation, I mean, if we're unlucky, it can go for years.
Well, as they get older, then we start talking about friends.
Right.
And parties and sleepovers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
These become really big, challenging issues as our kids start to gain a little bit of independence and they just get bigger
you didn't
time.
You didn't mention the fights in early childhood about it's time to leave the park or you've got to wear your seatbelt.
Or no, I'm not going to buy you something every time I go to the shops.
Yeah. Or I know that everyone's probably anticipating that we're going to say that the screen time fights start when they're teenagers, but hello, have you ever taken a screen off a 2-year-old? I mean... That starts at the very beginning. I've lost count. There's a lot of fights that we could potentially have with our kids, and as parents. Oh, by the way, let's finish the list. By the time the kids are in their teen years, we've got things like
social media, alcohol and drugs, intimacy, sex and pornography, respect, consideration of others, and I've actually put dress on there. I think that there's, some really important conversations we need to have with our kids around self-respect and, I guess
how we display ourselves.
Yeah, yep. And how the world sees us as a result. I'm not suggesting for a second that we kind of dress for other people.
You're on the kind of ground here where some people could get quite upset. But let's be honest. When we've got a 13 or a 14-year-old walking around sending specific messages to the people around him or her through the way that they're dressing, it can have an impact on any number of things. So I think that it's definitely worth a conversation, and there are going to be some families who will think not at all, and other families who are right there beside you on that one.
So I guess the conversation really is not so much about how do we have these fights with our kids, because any parent would suggest that the last thing they want to do is have another fight.
But every single one of these things is a hill to die on. From a parent point of view, and definitely from a child point of view. And ultimately this comes down to this conversation about control. As a parent, some parents would say, let's go to the clothing issue. I will not let you leave the house looking like that. Or the alcohol issue. You're not going to that party if there's going to be alcohol there. Full stop, end of story. You're 12 or you're 16 or you're whatever. And some parents will say, you're not leaving the table until you've eaten all 4 of those peas. 4 of them. It's only 4 peas. And you need to have something green, and you need to have. And so, as parents, we see these things as critically important and things that have to be controlled. Why?
We see ourselves as being kind of in charge of our kids' safety and their well-being.
Yeah, so we're trying to protect them. It was more of a rhetorical question, but I'm glad you answered it. Yeah, it's about saying, I want you to grow up healthy and strong and safe, and that's
and
why.
Happy.
And yeah, I want my kids to be happy.
And yet we spend so much time fighting.
But the difficulty is, even though each of these things matters, and matters a great deal, and is worth engaging in some level of conflict over, it's how we have the conflict. And I don't know that anything is really worth, well, a couple of things are. It's definitely worth highlighting. It is worth having a fight if your child's safety is at risk. There are some times where we as a parent simply need to say no, and I will stand my ground on this one. But there are very few, not nearly as many of those things as we often make out that there could be. Very, very few. In fact, when I think about the last 23, 24 years of child rearing that you and I have been through, I can really only think of a couple of times in my life where I have stood there and said, I'm your father and I forbid it. It will not happen. I'm getting very serious about this. I've got my cranky face on. No. It just doesn't happen, because we can usually work it out without having to have a full-blown battle with our kids. So after the break, let's talk about how we avoid the conflict but still get to work through these tough things to keep our kids safe and help them to make healthy decisions for their lives. Neurodiverse children are beautiful, but they also bring unique challenges for parents and educators. The world does not always accommodate them easily or well. Communication, affection, behaviour, learning, and almost every other aspect of life can be challenging for the child and their families. The webinar, A Parent's Guide to Autism, by leading autism expert Michelle Garnett, can help parents and educators strengthen the bond with their autistic children for better outcomes for children and families. A Parent's Guide to Autism is available at happyfamilies.com.au.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And I'm sure that everyone is wanting to hear how we have a conversation that doesn't lead to conflict with their kids.
Yeah. So let's just put this out there. Typically, if your child wants to do something, whether they're 2 or 22, or let's say 2 or 18, because once they're past 18, you've got limited input really in what's going on. But as we're raising these kids, when they want something that we're not willing to give them, they will usually have a dead set, fair income, full-blown dummy spit and completely lose the plot before we get to have a conversation with them. We had this happen in the last few weeks in our home. We were dealing with the screen issue all over again. We said to one of the kids, we really need to sit down and have a conversation. We don't want to have a big battle, or we don't want to have a big war. You're big enough to have this conversation, so let's just chat it through. And instead of chatting it through, she lost the plot. She slammed the door. She said, I'm not talking to you. You're the worst parents in the world. This is so unfair. And just totally blew up. But later on that night, we were able to sit down, and while she was still not the most excited participant in the conversation, we got to have the conversation. And there was no conflict as we walked through that conversation. She'd calmed down. She knew that the conversation needed to be had, and we were able to work things through reasonably well. And while we haven't had perfect compliance subsequent to the conversation, we've been able to see vast improvements.
What was interesting in that specific context was just the realization that in spite of all of the conversations we've had, she was still quite oblivious to what our concerns were.
And that's such an important thing for us to highlight. If you're a parent and you think, because I've had the conversation, it's done, think again. It doesn't go in. Honestly, you've got to have the conversation multiple times. There's just no such thing as a one-off. It's an ongoing conversation. And I think that's why we as parents get so frustrated, because it is so exhausting. It's such a... I don't even know what the word is that I'm looking for. It's just so tiring all the time. So I reckon there's a couple of things that we can do to frame this well. The first is, you know my ladder of life metaphor. I use it all the time.
Yep.
And the kids roll their eyes when they hear it, but it's a good metaphor.
Only because you're on top.
Well, they will have the chance to do that in their own lives at some point. But here's the metaphor. I like to frame these conversations with the kids by saying, life is like climbing a ladder. And I've climbed, and then I say how many rungs of the ladder I've climbed.
62.
Come on. I've climbed nearly 50 rungs. I've 46, 47 rungs up this ladder of life. And the view from 47 rungs up, I can see a long way into the distance. I can see a lot of stuff that's coming. And it's my job as the person higher up the ladder to warn the people lower down the ladder that there's stuff coming. Now, here's the difference. When you're low on the ladder, like you're 12 or you're 15 or you're 3 or 4, you can't see very far at all. But
you think you can.
Yeah, because you can see further now than you've ever been able to see in your life.
Because you're above the trees, right? You're above the tree line now, and you can actually see.
Yeah.
And it looks like you can see the world.
Right. The other thing about being further down the ladder, though, and I explain this to the kids, is you get to see all the detail. I can't see the detail from up here. I'm pretty high up. I can see stuff that's coming, but I'm not in the thick of it. I'm not down in the mud and in the leaves and in the trees and on the ground. I can't see and hear what the kids at school are actually saying. I'm not looking at the chats that you're involved in. If we're talking about screens and social media, for example, I don't know exactly what's going on there. I just know because I'm so high up, I can see the trouble that's coming. And therefore, while you know more detail, I have more of this big picture view. And as your parent, it's my job to warn you about what's coming and work out with you how we can keep you safe, because you're going to be stuck in the actual warfare that happens lower down the ladder. Now, that metaphor as a framing for a conversation is actually a pretty powerful way to help kids to become open to an alternative perspective, a perspective that they're not real flash on hearing otherwise.
Yeah, so what happens, though, if you use that metaphor and it doesn't work any magic? Your kid looks at you like you have no clue what you're talking about. They're not willing to meet you anywhere close to the middle to be able to have what you would consider an adult-to-adult conversation.
Well, it's not an adult-to-adult conversation, and I would say welcome to parenthood, because we do talk till we're blue in the face, and the kids really do think that they know better. Well, I mean, I'm astounded at how much our 8-year-old really thinks that she knows compared to us. She knows everything. Absolutely. But it's not about having an adult-to-adult conversation. This is a parent-to-child conversation. And I think the second thing that I would encourage with the framing, which kind of answers this question, is to let your child know this is a really big challenge for us, whether it's going to bed on time or whether it's eating good food or whether it's choosing good friends, or pick your issue all the way through to the screens and the alcohol and the heavy stuff of the adolescent years. The relationship will always come first. I love you no matter what you choose. I love you no matter whether you follow my requests and my preferences or not. But what's going to make you happier and healthier, what's going to keep you safer, is for us to work together on this and find a solution that we can both feel good about. And just by making the relationship primary, it actually draws kids to us. It helps them to recognize that we're there. Now, this is not and I'm going to be really soft on you and let you do whatever you want. It's not that. It's letting them know I value the relationship. It's absolutely critical. There's a third thing that I want to highlight, and that is that it's not worth going to war over preferences. There are some principles, some values that it actually is worth going to war on. It really is worth having the battle, and that might be things to do with the genuine safety and health and protection of your child. If they've got preferences about music and you don't like the music, or if they've got preferences around what foods they do and don't like. I mean, we've all got preferences, and it's just that we're the grown-ups, and so we get to we just get to think that our preferences are normal and everybody should toe the line with our preferences. But that's not how it is at all. So preferences versus principles. Preferences, go easy. Principles, that's the stuff where you say, actually, as a matter of principle, this is just a big fat no. And again, you won't have to do it very often.
So I guess we've got a couple of take-home messages from today's conversation. There are going to be a bajillion conversations that are worth having.
Right.
But hopefully if we take the right approach, they don't actually need to become fights. There might be some contention as you start to work things through. But I guess that number one take-home would be that the relationship comes first, no matter what. And letting your child know that you love them no matter what choices they make. But these things are important and we want to try and work with them, not against them.
And I want to add to that, I always frame with our kids that this is about being healthy and about being safe and about being wise. I don't ever frame it in terms of what's right and wrong or what's good and bad, because they really resist our morality. And you can argue about what's good and bad based on any number of other factors and judgments.
Well, they don't have your life experience. So you saying that social media is bad based on your knowledge and experience doesn't equate to what they're seeing.
Yeah, their experience is, no, it's not bad and everyone's on it and this is my life. Whereas if we talk about safety and being healthy and making wise choices, there's no moral contaminant in there and it's much harder to argue against that. It's just better footing. That doesn't mean that as a parent you don't believe that there's good and bad, right and wrong. It just means that the conversations go smoother when we remove the moral element and focus instead on what's healthy, what's safe, and what's wise.
And I think lastly, the ladder metaphor that you use is really powerful to show perspective. And, you know, if you wanted to take it to the extreme, go and climb a ladder together.
Yeah.
Ask them what they see from their rung three rungs up and your rung 10 rungs up. What can they see and what's the difference?
Yeah, and you don't even need a ladder. You could stand in the upstairs window versus the downstairs window and just look at the different perspective, or put someone on the roof. Like massive differences there. I just want to highlight as well though, expect contention, expect hardship, expect some sort of a challenge, because the kids do get annoyed. They want their perspectives to be heard and they want their own way. So hopefully this has been a helpful conversation about how you can navigate those challenges. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Ruland for Bridge Media, with Craig Bruce as our executive producer. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, please join us at happyfamilies.com.au.